Fine, let's start. Number 1. Yopo. Picture a man kneeling on the cracked earth of the Orinoco Basin. Another man stands over him, lifts a hollow tube carved from bird bone, fits one end into the kneeling man's nostril, and blows. A cloud of rust-colored powder slams into the back of his skull. Within seconds, his eyes flood, his head snaps back, and the visions arrive like a collapsing wall. This is Yopo, and people have been doing this for at least 4,000 years. Yopo is a snuff ground from the roasted seeds of a tree called Anadenanthera peregrina. The seeds are toasted, crushed, and mixed with an alkaline additive, usually lime made from snail shells or plain wood ash. That additive matters because it frees the active molecules so the body can absorb them through the lining of the nose. Inside the powder are 3 powerful tryptamines: bufotenine, DMT, and 5-methoxy-DMT. The last of these is among the most potent psychedelics known by weight. The archaeology runs deep. Snuff trays carved from wood and bone, along with the tubes used to blow the powder, have been found across South America and the Caribbean. A smoking pipe from Inca Cueva in Argentina, dated to roughly 4,500 years ago, tested positive for anadenanthera alkaloids. That makes it some of the oldest direct chemical evidence of a hallucinogen anywhere on Earth. When Spanish friars reached the Caribbean, they watched the Taino inhale a snuff they called cohoba through forked tubes during divination rituals. The chronicler Ramon Pane described it around 1496. Participants collapsed, foamed, and spoke with spirits, and the friars condemned the whole thing as demonic. There is a chemical twist. Bufotenine, one of Yopo's key compounds, is also found in the skin of toads. In 2019, a ritual bundle from a Bolivian cave called Cueva del Chileno was analyzed by Melanie Miller and her colleagues. A single small pouch made from a fox snout held residues of cocaine, harmine, bufotenine, and DMT all together. People were blending pharmacologies 1,000 years ago. The researcher Constantino Manuel Torres has spent decades cataloging the snuff trays of the Andes, where hundreds of kits were buried with the dead at San Pedro de Atacama. The mainstream view treats Yopo as a divination tool. Archaeologists see a continuous snuff complex stretching back millennia. And there is a fringe idea of an ancient, Pan-American tryptamine culture. Whichever you favor, the experience itself was a 10 to 20 minute storm, and that was only the opening act. Because the next Amazonian snuff was made from something that looked like blood. Number 2. Virola Snuff. In the northwest Amazon, along the headwaters of the Rio Negro and the Orinoco, there is a tree whose inner bark bleeds. Slice into a Virola theodora, and a deep red resin wells up like a wound. That resin is the raw material for one of the most overwhelming psychedelics ever used by human beings. The Yanomami of Venezuela and Brazil are the best documented users, and they call it epina nyaquana, or ebene. To make it, they strip the bark, scrape the blood-red exudate, and boil it down to a paste. The paste is dried, pulverized, and often mixed with an alkaline ash made from the bark of other trees. That ash works the same way the lime in Yopo does, helping the body absorb the active compounds. Those compounds are DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT, and in Virola, the 5-methoxy form often dominates. That is why the experience is so brutal. Where DMT produces fast geometric visuals, 5-methoxy-DMT tends to deliver a wave of pure force that dissolves the sense of self entirely. Users staggered, vomited, and reported visions of the Hekura, the spirits at the center of Yanomami cosmology. Our knowledge of Virola owes an enormous debt to one man. Richard Evans Schultz, the Harvard botanist, often called the father of modern ethnobotany, documented these preparations during his Amazon fieldwork beginning in the 1940s. He noticed something remarkable. The same trees that yielded the snuff also produced a resin used to poison arrows and to treat fungal skin infections. One plant, 3 completely different jobs. The snuff is blown through tubes that can be meters long, one person delivering the dose to another in a single forceful breath. There is no need for any additive to protect the drug from digestion, because blowing it up the nose bypasses the gut entirely. That detail will matter later when we reach a brew that had to solve exactly that problem. Virola belongs to the nutmeg family, Myristicaceae, a small botanical curiosity given that nutmeg itself is mildly psychoactive through entirely different chemistry. The ethnographic films made by Napoleon Chagnon in the 1960s captured Epona rituals and spread awareness of the practice through anthropology. Dating Virola use is hard. Resin oxidizes from bright red to brown within minutes and leaves almost no durable residue, so its true antiquity is inferred from the broader snuff complex rather than proven directly. The mainstream sees a regional shamanic tool. Ethnographers see spirit diagnosis. And on the fringe, some imagine a lost continental tradition. From a snuff made of blood, we turn to a handful of seeds that are almost natural LSD. Number 3. Ololiuqui. When Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist who discovered LSD, examined a batch of Mexican morning glory seeds in 1960, he found something that other chemists refused to believe. The seeds contained lysergic acid amide, a molecule so close to LSD that it sits in the same chemical family. Nature, it seemed, had been making a relative of acid for thousands of years. The seeds are called Ololiuqui, and they come from a climbing morning glory, Turbina corymbosa. A parallel species, Ipomoea tricolor, was used the same way and called Tlitliltsin. Both carry ergoline alkaloids, chiefly ergine and isoergine. The shock of Hofmann's discovery was that ergolines were thought to occur almost exclusively in ergot, a fungus that grows on grain. Finding them in a flowering plant rewrote the rules. There is a likely explanation that deepens the strangeness. The alkaloids may not be made by the plant at all, but by a fungus living symbiotically inside it. The ergot connection, it turns out, may be literal. The written record reaches back to the Spanish conquest. Francisco Hernandez, physician to King Philip II, surveyed the medicine of New Spain in the 1500s and described Ololiuqui, illustrating the vine with its white trumpet flowers. He recorded that native healers guarded its use carefully and approached it with reverence and fear. Aztec priests used the seeds in divination and folded them into ritual ointments. A patient would be left alone in darkness and silence with the ground, strained seed infusion, waiting for diagnostic visions to arrive. The effect was nothing like the bright clarity of LSD. It was dreamy, sedating, and frequently dysphoric, with nausea and cramping that made it one of the harshest classic psychedelics on the body. The Spanish Inquisition tried to stamp it out, branding the practice idolatrous, and Ololiuqui survived only by going underground in indigenous communities. Centuries later, the banker and ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson helped reconnect the ancient accounts to living Zapotec and Mazatec practice, proving the tradition had never fully died. The mainstream view is straightforward. This is an ergoline seed psychedelic with deep roots. Historically, it was an Aztec sacrament, and on the fringe, it gets called a pre-LSD natural acid cult. What kept it from ever becoming a recreational drug, despite its kinship with the most famous psychedelic of the 20th century, was simple. The body load was punishing, the dose threshold steep, and the experience often unpleasant, which is almost gentle compared to a root that could pin a person to the ground for 3 days. Number 4. Iboga. Most psychedelics are over in hours. Iboga is measured in days. A full initiation dose can leave a person lying immobile for 1 to 3 days, traveling through a structured, narrative vision in which they meet dead relatives and review the whole of their own life. It is widely considered one of the most demanding and dangerous psychoactive experiences a human can choose. Iboga is a shrub of the dogbane family, native to the rainforests of Gabon, Cameroon, and the Republic of Congo. The active alkaloid, ibogaine, is concentrated in the yellowish root bark, alongside relatives like ibogamine and tabernathine. Rather than a sensory storm, ibogaine acts as an oneirogen, a producer of long, dreamlike waking visions. At the heart of its traditional use is the Bwiti religion of Gabon, which blends ancestral worship with elements absorbed from Christianity during the colonial period. In a Bwiti initiation, a new member takes a massive flood dose meant to open the head and carry them to the land of the ancestors. The root bark is intensely bitter, and vomiting is treated not as a side effect, but as a purifying part of the rite. French researchers isolated ibogaine around 1901, and from the 1930s into the 1960s, it was sold in France as a stimulant tonic called Lambarin. Then, in 1962, an American named Howard Lotsoff took ibogaine and noticed something extraordinary. His heroin withdrawal and craving simply switched off. That observation launched ibogaine's modern reputation as an anti-addiction agent, and informal clinics later opened across Mexico and the Caribbean to treat opioid dependence. The danger is real and specific. Ibogaine can prolong the QT interval of the heartbeat and has been linked to fatal arrhythmias, which is why it remains illegal or unregulated in much of the world. It acts across several receptor systems at once, including NMDA, opioid, and sigma receptors, a complexity that may explain its unusual effect on addiction. A metabolite called noribogaine lingers in the body and stretches the afterglow well past a full day. Gabon has declared Iboga a national cultural treasure, partly because international demand for addiction treatment is driving the plant toward overharvesting. The mainstream frames it as a promising research drug. Traditional practitioners frame it as ancestral initiation, and the fringe frames it as the ultimate cure. From a root that keeps you under for days, we move to a leaf whose chemistry breaks every rule on this list. Number 5. Salvia Divinorum. Every other substance in this video shares a basic feature. Each one contains nitrogen, and most of them work by imitating serotonin in the brain. Salvia Divinorum does neither. It is the genuine outlier, a plant whose active molecule is built differently and acts on a completely different switch. Salvia Divinorum is a member of the mint family from the cloud forests of the Sierra Mazateca in Oaxaca, Mexico. Its active compound, salvinorin A, is the most potent naturally occurring hallucinogen known by weight, active in mere hundreds of micrographs. Unlike the alkaloids in every other entry here, salvinorin A contains no nitrogen at all. It is a terpenoid, the same broad class of molecule that gives plants their scents and resins. Even stranger is how it works. Instead of targeting the serotonin system, salvinorin A is a powerful and selective agonist at the kappa opioid receptor, a part of the brain involved in mood and perception that no other classic psychedelic touches. That is why the experience is so alien. People describe becoming an object, merging with a surface, or being folded into a flat, two-dimensional reality, often in a matter of minutes. The Mazatec call it Ska Maria Pastora, the leaves of Mary the Shepherdess, a name that fuses indigenous practice with Catholic imagery. Traditionally, curanderos chew bundles of fresh leaves or drink an infusion of crushed leaves in darkness, frequently using it as a substitute when psilocybin mushrooms are out of season. In those traditional forms, the dose is mild and meditative, nothing like the overwhelming punch of a concentrated smoked extract. The plant arrived in Western science through the same pair who appear again and again in this story. R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hofmann collected and studied it in the early 1960s. Decades later, the researcher Daniel Siebert published influential work pinning down its extreme potency and its kappa opioid mechanism. There is a clue to its antiquity hidden in its biology. Salvia Divinorum rarely sets viable seed and is propagated almost entirely from cuttings, which strongly suggests it is a cultigen, a plant shaped and maintained by human hands over a very long time. We cannot point to an artifact and date it, but a plant that depends on people to reproduce has been with people for ages. The mainstream now values salvia as a research tool for the kappa opioid system. Traditionally, it is healing and divination. On the fringe, it becomes a doorway to other dimensions. From the strangest pharmacology on the list, we go to the oldest temple built around a drug. Number 6. The San Pedro Cactus. High in the Peruvian Andes stands the temple of Chavin de Huantar. Carved into its stone is a fanged deity holding a tall, ribbed cactus in one hand. That carving dates to somewhere between roughly 1200 and 500 BCE, and it is the oldest clear image we have of a psychedelic in the Americas. The cactus is San Pedro, and the temple may have been engineered around the experience it produced. San Pedro is a fast-growing columnar cactus native to Peru and Ecuador. Its active compound is mescaline, a phenethylamine, the same molecule that powers peyote. To prepare it, the cactus is sliced and boiled for hours into a bitter green liquid known as kimora or huachuma. Because San Pedro carries less mescaline by weight than peyote, larger amounts are consumed. What makes Chavin extraordinary is the architecture. The archaeologist John Rick has argued that the temple's labyrinth of underground galleries was deliberately designed to disorient. Visitors moved through dark, twisting stone passages, while conch shell trumpets sounded and light was carefully controlled. Snuff trays, mortars, and those trumpets together suggest a multi-sensory ritual machine, with the cactus at its core. The built environment was a technology for amplifying the drug. The name San Pedro, Saint Peter, is a colonial Christian overlay, a reference to the saint who holds the keys to heaven. The slow onset of the cactus suits the imagery. Effects build over 1 to 2 hours and can last 10 to 14 hours. A long, lucid, emotionally open journey rather than a sudden assault. The chemistry behind it was worked out far later. The German chemist Arthur Hefter isolated mescaline from cactus in 1897, and Ernst Spath synthesized it in 1919, establishing the molecule that applies equally to San Pedro and peyote. Textiles and ceramics from the Chavin, Nazca, and Moche cultures depict the cactus and its associated imagery, and northern Peruvian curanderos still run all-night mesa ceremonies with huachuma today. The mainstream reads San Pedro as a long-running Andean entheogen. Archaeologists read it as the vehicle of the Chavin cult, possibly spread through control of esoteric ritual knowledge. The fringe imagines a psychedelic state religion radiating across the Andes. The continuity from that carved temple wall to a living healer's table makes it one of the longest attested psychedelic traditions on the planet. Next comes the brew that should have been impossible to invent. Number 7. Ayahuasca. Here is a genuine puzzle. The Amazon holds tens of thousands of plant species. Somehow, indigenous peoples found 2 specific plants that do nothing remarkable alone, but combined unlock one of the most profound psychedelic experiences known. The odds against stumbling on that pairing by chance are staggering, and yet there it is. Ayahuasca is a brew that traditionally combines a woody vine, Banisteriopsis kaapi, with the leaves of a shrub called chacruna, Psychotria viridis. The chacruna leaf is full of DMT. On its own, swallowing DMT does nothing, because an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase destroys it before it can reach the brain. The vine solves that problem. It contains harmala alkaloids, harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine, which block that very enzyme. With the gatekeeper disabled, the DMT survives and crosses into the brain. That 2-plant synergy is the central mystery. It is the kind of solution that looks like it should have required a chemist with a laboratory, and instead it emerged from the rainforest generations before chemistry existed. The name comes from Quechua and is often translated as the vine of the soul or the vine of the dead. The oldest direct evidence is that same Bolivian bundle, the one from Cueva del Chileno, dated to roughly 1,000 years ago. Its residues of harmony alongside DMT-bearing material are the strongest archaeological hint that the synergy is at least a millennium old. The brew is made by pounding and boiling the vine with the leaves for many hours, reducing everything to a thick brown liquid. Drinking it brings visions, violent vomiting, known as la purga, and an emotionally cathartic journey lasting 4 to 6 hours. Richard Evans Schultes documented many of the regional admixture plants that get swapped into local recipes. In the 20th century, Brazilian syncretic churches such as Santo Daime and União do Vegetal adopted ayahuasca as a legal sacrament. Today, research groups in Brazil and Spain are running clinical trials into its antidepressant potential. Shamans, meanwhile, guide the visions with Icaros, sung melodies that shape the experience. There is honest debate about the age of the classic combination. Some scholars argue that people used the vine alone for far longer, and that the precise two-plant brew may be more recent than tradition suggests. The mainstream celebrates it as a triumph of indigenous botanical knowledge. Skeptics urge caution about its true antiquity. The fringe says the knowledge was gifted by the plants themselves. Our next drug we can only glimpse, painted on a wall, thousands of years old. Number 8. Psilocybin mushrooms. There is a problem with the prehistory of mushrooms. They rot. A mushroom eaten 10,000 years ago leaves no fossil, no residue, nothing for a chemist to test. So the case for deep prehistoric mushroom use rests almost entirely on images painted on rock and on how we choose to read them. The most famous image is in the Tassili Najer of southern Algeria. There, among ancient rock paintings, is a running figure whose body appears to sprout mushroom shapes from its arms and head. Some researchers date it to roughly 7,000 to 9,000 years ago and call it the mushroom shaman. In Spain, near Villar del Humo, the Selva Pascuala mural shows a row of bell-shaped forms that Brian Akers and Gaston Guzman argued, in the journal Economic Botany in 2011, represent a local species, Psilocybe hispanica. That mural is roughly 6,000 years old, and tellingly, Psilocybe hispanica grows on cattle dung in the High Pyrenees, exactly the kind of pastoral Neolithic setting the painting comes from. Psilocybe mushrooms contain psilocybin, which the body converts into active psilocin, producing 4 to 6 hours of visual distortion and altered time and self. In Mesoamerica, the evidence becomes more tangible. Carved stone effigies, known as mushroom stones, some more than 2,000 years old, survive from highland Guatemala. The Aztecs called sacred mushrooms Teonanacatl, the flesh of the gods, recorded by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún in the 1500s. The modern reconnection is a story in itself. In 1955, R. Gordon Wasson took part in a nighttime mushroom ceremony, a velada, led by the Mazatec curandera Maria Sabina. He published an account in Life magazine in 1957, introducing millions of readers to the idea of a living mushroom cult. Albert Hoffman then isolated psilocybin and psilocin from Psilocybe mexicana in 1958, giving science a standardized version of the ancient sacrament. Not everyone accepts the rock art. Critics argue the Tassili's shapes could be stylized arrows, flowers, or other objects, and that we are seeing mushrooms because we want to. That caution is fair, given how much rides on interpretation. The wildly speculative end produced the stoned ape hypothesis, Terence McKenna's idea that psilocybin drove human cognitive evolution, an idea mainstream science does not accept. The mainstream position lands on probable deep use with debated specifics. Skeptics stress the ambiguity of the iconography. The fringe reaches for human origins. What sets the next drug apart is that we do not have to interpret anything, because we can put it under a radiocarbon date. Number 9. Peyote. In dry caves along the Rio Grande in Texas, archaeologists recovered small, dried, button-shaped pieces of cactus. When researchers radiocarbon dated them, the buttons came back at roughly 5,700 years old. And when they were chemically tested, despite all those millennia, they still contained mescaline. That makes peyote one of the oldest drugs in continuous human use anywhere on Earth, and the proof is physical, not painted. Peyote is a small, spineless, button-shaped cactus native to the Chihuahuan Desert of northern Mexico and southern Texas. Its principal psychoactive compound is mescaline, the same molecule found in San Pedro, but peyote concentrates it far more densely. The ancient buttons from the Shumla Caves and a nearby location called the CM site were analyzed by researchers including Martin Terry, who confirmed the mescaline content. The plant grows with extraordinary slowness, sometimes taking more than a decade to reach flowering size. That slow growth, combined with a limited natural range, makes peyote acutely vulnerable to overharvesting, and wild populations are declining today. The Huichol people of Mexico, who call themselves the Wixárika, undertake an annual pilgrimage to a sacred desert landscape called Wirikuta to gather it, and they regard peyote, deer, and maize as a sacred trinity at the center of their cosmology. Eaten fresh or dried, peyote is intensely bitter and reliably induces nausea before the visionary effects take hold, which last 10 to 12 hours and are famous for vivid color enhancement and emotional clarity. The chemistry was unlocked by the German chemist Arthur Hefter in 1897, who isolated mescaline by testing fractions of the cactus on himself, an early example of letting the body identify the active ingredient. The colonial reaction was hostile. The Spanish Inquisition condemned peyote as diabolical and issued edicts against it in the 1600s. Yet the tradition endured, and in 1918, the Native American Church was formally organized, using peyote as a sacrament in all-night ceremonies. The Church has fought repeated legal battles, and United States federal law now grants it a specific exemption to use peyote despite mescaline's controlled status. In 1954, Aldous Huxley described his own mescaline experience in The Doors of Perception, carrying peyote chemistry to a wide literary audience. The mainstream sees the oldest dated entheogen of North America. Culturally, it is a living sacrament. The fringe calls it a key to consciousness. From the oldest dated drug, we finish the countdown with the one whose archaeology may be the firmest of all. Number 10, the Cannabis Braziers of Jirzankal. At about 3,000 meters up in the Pamir Mountains of far western China sits a burial ground called the Jirzankal Cemetery. Inside its tombs, archaeologists found wooden braziers, simple fire bowls built to hold hot stones. When the residue inside them was analyzed, it told a clear and ancient story about getting high. A study led by Yimin Yang and Robert Spengler, published in Science Advances in 2019, tested the brazier residue and found cannabinol, known as CBN, which is a breakdown product of THC. The presence of so much CBN meant the cannabis burned in these bowls had an unusually high THC content for the period. This is among the earliest clear chemical evidence of people choosing and burning cannabis specifically to alter their minds, rather than growing it for fiber or seed. The setting tells the rest. The braziers were found in tombs, dated to roughly 2,500 years ago, which points to a mortuary ritual, smoke meant to accompany the dead, or to alter the consciousness of mourners. Hot stones were placed in the bowls to heat the cannabis and release its smoke inside the enclosed tomb, an early and effective form of vaporization. Wild cannabis is usually low in THC, so the elevated levels suggest either deliberate selection of unusually potent plants or early cultivation, possibly helped by the natural effect of high-altitude ultraviolet light, which can drive up THC. Jirzankal sits along the early routes of the Silk Road, and the authors tied the practice to networks moving goods and ideas across Central Asia. There is a striking textual parallel. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the Scythians throwing cannabis onto hot stones inside closed tents and inhaling the smoke. For a long time that sounded like a traveler's tall tale, until frozen Scythian tombs at Pazyryk in the Altai, excavated by Sergei Rudenko, turned up cannabis seeds and braziers that matched the account almost exactly. THC works on the brain's cannabinoid CB1 receptors, a system completely separate from every other drug in this video. The mainstream calls Jirzankal the earliest secure evidence of ritual cannabis. Skeptics note it may have been a special ceremony, rather than everyday smoking. The fringe imagines a pan-steppe cannabis cult stretching across Central Asia. What makes the site a landmark is the durability of the evidence, residue, brazier, and tomb context all together. Now that we have walked through all 10, the deeper questions begin. Step back from the individual plants and a pattern emerges. These 10 substances fall into 3 molecular families, and together they cover almost the entire map of modern brain pharmacology. The first family is the tryptamines, which includes Yopo, Virola, the DMT in Ayahuasca, and the psilocin from mushrooms. Tryptamines work by imitating serotonin and locking onto a receptor called serotonin 2A, the master switch of the classic psychedelic state. The second family is the phenethylamines, the mescaline in both San Pedro and Peyote. Mescaline reaches that same serotonin 2A receptor, but by a different molecular route, which is why 2 plants from opposite ends of the Americas can produce comparable visions. Then come the outliers, and they are what make this list strange. The ergolines and Ololiuqui are cousins of LSD, and their presence in a flowering plant blurs the old line between fungal and botanical drugs. The salvinorin A in salvia ignores serotonin entirely and seizes the kappa opioid receptor instead, all without containing a single nitrogen atom. Ibogaine spreads itself across NMDA, opioid, and sigma receptors at once, and the THC at Jirzankal works on the cannabinoid CB1 system. 5 different receptor targets, found by people with no microscopes and no idea that receptors existed. Potency varies sharply even within a single family. 5-methoxy-DMT is active at far smaller doses than ordinary DMT or bufotenine, which is part of why a Virola Snuff can hit harder than a Yopo, one made from the same broad chemistry. Duration splits the same way. Yopo is over in 20 minutes, while Iboga can run for 3 days, and the difference comes down to how quickly the body breaks each molecule down and how long it clings to its receptor. The dreamlike afterglow of Iboga is stretched further still by a metabolite called noribogaine, which lingers long after the root itself has cleared. The ayahuasca trick deserves one more look, because it captures the whole theme. Swallowed DMT is destroyed by an enzyme in the gut. The vine supplies a molecule that jams that enzyme, so the DMT survives. Snuffs like Yopo and Virola never needed that solution, because blowing a drug up the nose skips the gut completely. Different routes into the body demanded different chemistry, and prehistoric people solved each problem the same way they solved everything: through trial, through the body, and sometimes through death. The molecules now sitting in clinical trials are the same ones these cultures mapped by hand. The obvious question is how anyone found them in the first place. Consider the scale of the search. The Amazon alone holds tens of thousands of plant species, and the great majority do nothing when eaten. Finding the ayahuasca pairing within that haystack, 2 plants that are inert alone but transformative together, looks almost impossible. Yet it was done, and not once, but many times across the world. The method was the body itself. With no instruments, people tasted, dosed, and observed, learning through generations which plants healed, which poisoned, and which opened the mind. It was bioassay by trial and by funeral, the same logic Arthur Hefter would later formalize in his laboratory in 1897 when he tested fractions of peyote on himself. The shaman and the chemist were running the same experiment, separated only by equipment and time. The pattern repeats across continents in ways too consistent to be accident. People in South America freed the alkaloids in Yopo with snail shell lime. People in the Amazon used tree bark ash for Virola. The same trick, an alkaline additive that releases a drug for absorption, was discovered independently again and again. Cultures selected for potency too. The cannabis at Jirzankal carried unusually high THC, and Yanomami specialists knew individual Virola trees by the strength and smell of their resin. Knowledge had to be stored without writing, and oral tradition became the database, holding precise instructions for dose and preparation across generations. Slow-growing cultigens like Peyote and Salvia, plants that depend on human hands to survive, prove how long that tending has gone on. None of this requires mysticism. The fringe likes to say the plants taught their secrets directly, and it is easy to see why, but the simpler explanation is iteration, the patient accumulation of small discoveries. You can even see the learning curve, from plain chewing to water infusions, to alkaline additives, and finally to the multi-plant synergy of ayahuasca. That escalation raises a harder question. Why were these particular drugs the ones that pushed the human body to its limit? Not every plant on this list is gentle, and several were ordeals by design. Iboga sits at the dangerous extreme. Its risk of cardiac arrhythmia is genuine, and a flood dose can incapacitate a person for 3 days, which is why it is the most physically demanding entry here. Ololiuqui, for all its kinship with LSD, brings vasoconstriction and a dysphoric heaviness that punishes the body. The deliriant nightshades that powered an earlier chapter of this channel, the dataras and henbanes, belong to a different and even darker register than these serotonergic visionaries, but the principle is shared. Power and danger travel together. Yopo and Virola were violent by intent, a rush of vomiting and streaming that doubled as a test of endurance. Ayahuasca built the purge directly into the ceremony, treating La Purga as cleansing rather than as a flaw. Salvia produced a disorientation so alien that few people ever wanted a second encounter. Even peyote made its users sick before it made them lucid. So why did none of these become casual recreational drugs in their traditional homes? The answer is that the cultures wrapped them in containers. Darkness, silence, fasting, song, and a guide were not decoration. They were a safety system, a way of managing substances that could otherwise overwhelm. The modern phrase set and setting names, something prehistoric peoples engineered thousands of years earlier, the careful shaping of mindset and environment around a powerful experience. The difference between a managed ordeal and a catastrophe was preparation. When this video calls these the drugs modern humans could not handle, the real meaning is narrower and sharper. It is the unprepared who could not handle them. The initiated built entire institutions to survive them, and even those institutions left gaps in the record we still cannot fill. For all the chemistry and archaeology, the honest answer to many questions is that we are not sure. Take ayahuasca. We do not know how old the classic two-plant brew really is. The vine may have been used alone for thousands of years before anyone added the DMT leaf, and the precise combination could be far more recent than tradition claims. The Bolivian bundle proves 1,000 years, but the trail goes cold beyond it. The rock art is just as uncertain. We cannot say for sure that the Tassili figure depicts mushrooms at all, rather than arrows or flowers seen through hopeful eyes. We do not know how far back Virola use truly goes, because its resin leaves almost nothing to date. We do not know whether the Bafotenine traditions of Yopo ever crossed paths with the toad, venom traditions that share the same molecule. We cannot fully reconstruct what happened inside the galleries of Chavin, whether the disorientation came mainly from the cactus, the sound, the darkness, or all of them woven together. Even the basic biology holds mysteries. We are still untangling whether the ergoline alkaloids in morning glory are made by the plant or by a fungus hidden inside it. We do not know how widespread mushroom use really was, because the evidence rots away to nothing. We do not know whether the potent cannabis at Jirzankal was deliberately cultivated or simply gathered from unusually strong wild plants. and we will never recover the recipes the Inquisition burned, or the plants that were used and left no trace at all. The limits here are the limits of residue chemistry and of reading pictures across millennia. In archaeology, the absence of evidence is never quite the evidence of absence, which leaves the door open. What we can say, standing back from all 10, is something larger. These 10 substances were not invented in any laboratory. They were discovered, embedded in ritual, and carried across thousands of years before chemistry had a name. Each one, we now know, maps onto a specific receptor system in the human brain that modern science only identified in the last 100 years. The serotonin switch, the kappa opioid receptor, the cannabinoid system, the tangled targets of ibogaine, all of them were being keyed by hand long before anyone knew they were there. The geographic sweep alone is astonishing. The snuffs of the Orinoco and the Amazon, the seeds and leaves of Oaxaca, the root of Gabon, the cactus of the Andes and the Texan desert, the painted mushrooms of the Sahara, and the smoking braziers of the Pamirs. Separate cultures, separated by oceans and ages, all reached for the same human experience and built the tools to survive it. There is a thread of loss running through every one of these stories. Cults suppressed by inquisitors, evidence decayed into nothing, plants now threatened by the very demand that rediscovered them. What survives reaches us in fragments, partly as chemical residue, partly as images on stone, partly as living traditions that never quite died. And the strangest turn of all is happening right now. The same molecules these ancient peoples mapped through trial and ordeal are sitting in modern clinical trials for depression and addiction, treated as cutting-edge medicine. What we call discovery may often be rediscovery. The drive to alter human consciousness turns out to be as old as ritual itself, and these 10 plants are the proof that it was never new.